At 89 years old, Charles Duke is one of only 4 living men who walked on the moon. And after decades of watching his mission fade into the background, while Apollo 11 took all the glory, he's finally speaking out about what he actually experienced up there.
You couldn't see any evidence of people. There was no cities visible.
The truth, as he tells it now, doesn't match the glossy images we've been sold for half a century. Duke's place in Apollo history is unique. Before he ever touched lunar soil, millions of people around the world knew his voice.
In 1961, I was a young fighter pilot in Germany when the first cosmonauts and astronauts were launched into space, and then I began to dream about maybe that would be the ultimate experience for a pilot.
That thick southern drawl coming through mission control in Houston during Apollo 11. When Neil Armstrong announced, "The Eagle has landed," it was Duke who replied from Earth, "Roger, tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue, we're breathing again." That single line made him part of the most famous moment in space exploration. But Duke wasn't the one getting the parade. He wasn't planting the flag. He was the invisible astronaut, the voice in the background guiding giants while quietly waiting for his own chance. Think about what that role meant. As Capcom, you're the lifeline between Earth and space. Every word you speak is filtered through the pressure of millions watching. Every hesitation gets magnified. For Apollo 11, there was zero room for error. Duke carried that weight in his voice, and when Armstrong and Aldrin touched down safely, he shared in their triumph.
It was hard to get through the hatch because of the backpack and everything. You had to make sure you wiggle your way around to get through.
Not as a passenger, but as a guardian. But the role came with a psychological twist. Imagine being the calm guide who talks humanity through its greatest leap while knowing you're still stuck on the ground. You live the mission in your bones, but from the wrong side of the glass. Duke later admitted that tension never left him. He wasn't just a voice. He was a participant who had to hold back the deepest urge to be there himself. That's what makes his later mission different from any other astronaut story. Unlike Armstrong, Collins, or Aldrin, Duke didn't just carry the memory of walking on the moon. He carried the double vision of being both earthbound and moonbound, of being the one who steadied voices trembling in space and the one who later heard his own voice echoing inside a helmet on another world. No other living astronaut has this perspective. Duke is the only man who was both the emotional anchor of Apollo 11 and the explorer of Apollo 16. His words from Houston were replayed worldwide, his southern drawl recognized across continents. Yet he remained a name few could place to a face, invisible until he wasn't. In recent interviews, Duke has opened up about what that duality really meant. He said guiding Armstrong and Aldrin felt like being a father watching his kids take their first steps.
You ever wonder why Neil Armstrong was the first out? Well, to get out, I'm standing on the right side, the commander stands on the left side, and to get out, you had to get on your hands and knees backwards and go out the hatch, which was between us.
When he finally got to walk on the moon himself, he couldn't help but compare the experience. Seeing firsthand what he once only imagined from mission data and grainy video feeds. That contrast gave him insight nobody else could claim. For decades, he kept most of these reflections quiet, overshadowed by bigger names and louder stories. But now, in his late 80s, Duke is finally breaking the silence. And it matters because his story isn't about aliens or lost civilizations. It's about how being both the invisible witness and the hands-on explorer makes him the ultimate lunar guide. When Duke tells us today that we missed something about the moon, it isn't just another astronaut reminiscing. It's a man with 2 vantage points finally stitching them together. When Charles Duke finally stepped out of the lunar module on Apollo 16, he expected to see the moon exactly the way he'd trained for. Gray dust, jagged rocks, endless emptiness. But what hit him first wasn't the surface. It was the sky, or rather the absence of it.
The spacesuits would not take darkness on the moon. So we were always on the moon during the daylight, early morning of the moon day. And the shadows were very long.
Imagine standing outside at night looking up at the stars. Now strip the stars away, strip the faint glow, strip even the suggestion of atmosphere. Above Duke's helmet wasn't just darkness, it was a black so absolute it felt like falling into nothing. He called it an incredible contrast, the deepest black sky against the almost blinding brightness of the lunar surface. Photographs never captured it, he said. No camera could balance that range. To the human eye, the difference was staggering. That revelation stuck with him for decades. On Earth, your vision adjusts between shadows and sunlight. But on the moon, the sharp divide never faded. Every boulder looked crisp as if etched with a knife, every shadow cut like an ink line on paper. Duke later admitted that people looking at the Apollo photos assume that's the full picture. In truth, the cameras flattened what was overwhelming in person. What he saw was a reality no photograph could honor. And here's the twist that still surprises people. They couldn't even see Earth. The most iconic image we think of, the blue marble hanging over a barren horizon, wasn't visible at all from where Apollo 16 landed. The Earth was directly overhead, positioned out of sight. Duke explained that if he tried to look up, all he saw was the inside of his helmet. The suit design blocked the very view most of us imagine as the highlight of being there. Think about that. Humanity assumes every moonwalker spent hours staring at Earthrise, overwhelmed by the beauty of home hanging in the void. In reality, Apollo 16's crew couldn't see it without craning awkwardly backward, which was impossible in the stiff suits. Duke said it bluntly. Looking straight up, you were looking at the opaque side of your helmet. The most poetic scene in pop culture never existed for him. This is why he's speaking out now. He wants people to understand the truth, not the myth. The moon wasn't a glossy postcard. It was brutal, stark, and limited by the very technology that kept them alive. The helmet itself narrowed their world. With a field of view like a fishbowl, Duke could see forward but not up or around without twisting his entire body. Peripheral vision was gone. That meant exploring the lunar surface wasn't just awe-inspiring, it was clumsy and disorienting. He described trying to survey a ridge while fighting against a suit that refused to let him turn his head naturally. It wasn't the free panoramic sweep we see in documentaries. It was a struggle inside hardware designed for survival, not comfort. Yet even within those limits, the emotional weight was crushing. Duke said the incredible contrast between black and white wasn't just visual, it felt spiritual. Imagine the universe erased of gradients, no soft skies, no distant haze, no clouds drifting lazily, just light and void. He admitted that standing there, he realized for the first time how alien the moon really was. It wasn't another desert, it wasn't another mountaintop, it was an environment that didn't care if he existed. And that contrast is what he believes history misunderstood. We've reduced the moon to a backdrop, a grayscale stage for heroic poses. Duke insists that what the astronauts saw was more shocking than any headline. It wasn't about planting a flag or taking a photo. It was about being swallowed by extremes that the human mind wasn't built to process. So why is he talking now, after 50 years? Because, as he puts it, the misconceptions have piled up. Movies, posters, and even NASA's own PR sold a version of the moon that doesn't line up with what the crew actually experienced. He wants to correct the record before his voice is gone. And his correction is simple. The moon wasn't beautiful in a comfortable way. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. That raises a question. If even the most iconic images left out the raw truth, then how much of our collective memory of Apollo is built on curated illusion? Duke's memories don't just add color, they strip away the filter. And yet Duke says the visuals were only half the story. The part he's most passionate about today isn't the sky or the shadows. It's what they actually achieved on the ground, the science that history barely remembers. While the world still obsesses over Apollo 11, the first step, the flag, the grainy broadcast. Charles Duke never forgets that Apollo 16 quietly pulled off achievements that changed lunar science forever. The problem? Almost nobody remembers them. And this eats at him, because what he and John Young did wasn't just following Armstrong's footsteps. They built something new, something history almost buried. Take this. Apollo 16 set up the very first telescope on the moon, not in orbit, not on Earth. Literally planted on lunar soil, a far ultraviolet telescope designed to capture light blocked by Earth's atmosphere. For the first time, humanity looked at the stars from a platform with no air, no distortion. Duke later called it a window into the universe that no observatory on Earth could match. A milestone most textbooks barely mention, and the mission wasn't short. Duke and Young spent 71 hours on the surface, nearly 3 full days, longer than many other Apollo crews. They weren't sightseeing, they were working. Driving the lunar rover across 16 miles of rugged terrain, hammering rocks, drilling cores, and hauling back material. By the time they left, they had collected 209 pounds of samples, some of the most geologically diverse ever retrieved. Even today, labs are still analyzing pieces Duke carried home. What makes this even more impressive is the instruments they hauled along. Apollo 16 carried X-ray and gamma-ray spectrometers to map the moon's chemical composition. These weren't gadgets. They revealed hidden fingerprints of iron, titanium, and magnesium, clues that reshaped theories about how the moon formed. Scientists still cite that data. Yet when people talk about Apollo, it's 11, 13, maybe 17, 16 slips through the cracks, and Duke feels that sting. He's admitted Apollo 16 deserves more than a footnote. He knows it lacked the drama of Apollo 13's near disaster, or the romance of Armstrong's first words. But in pure science, it was unmatched. His frustration is simple. If we forget the science, we've missed the very point of risking lives to go there. Still, Duke wasn't just a scientist. He was human, trapped in one of the harshest places imaginable, finding ways to break the tension. Enter the Lunar Olympics. During downtime, Duke and Young tried hopping like high jumpers. Duke managed a leap that sent him flying higher than expected, and when he landed, he fell backward. It could have been fatal. The backpack life support wasn't built for crashes. He later admitted it was stupid, but it reminded them they were still men, not machines. Even in lighter moments, Duke never lost sight of the mission. Every rock bag, every mile across the Descartes Highlands added to knowledge still reshaping planetary science. And yet, documentaries recycle Armstrong's footprint, Aldrin's salute, Lovell's radio calls. Apollo 16, one of the richest in discovery, barely rates a mention. That's why Duke has become more vocal. He's spoken out, given talks, and pushed museums to showcase Apollo 16's contributions. He knows time is short. He wants future generations to understand Apollo wasn't just flags and politics. It was unlocking secrets hidden in dust and stone. And here's the kicker. Some of Apollo 16's data is still being reanalyzed today, half a century later. In a sense, his mission is still alive. This leads to the tension defining his final years. Duke doesn't just want to celebrate Apollo 16, he wants to defend it. Because if Apollo 16's triumphs can be overshadowed, what happens when people start claiming the whole thing never happened at all? At 89, Duke has taken on a new mission, confronting moon landing deniers with the unshakable truth of his experiences. For him, it's no longer about proving he was there. It's about protecting a legacy that feels under siege. In recent years, Duke has found himself face to face with people who flat out tell him Apollo never happened. Instead of losing his temper, Duke looked one man in the eye and calmly replied, "Sir, I was there." His voice carried the weight of someone who guided Armstrong down from mission control. and then walked on the surface himself. That's authority no YouTube thread, no Reddit comment, no viral TikTok can match. But the denials still sting. Duke admits it frustrates him that half a century after humanity's greatest achievement, people call it a hoax.
A lot of people don't believe we landed on the moon.
That's one small step for man.
He doesn't shrug it off. He takes it personally. Because to him, when someone denies Apollo, they're not just erasing NASA. They're erasing the sweat, the risk, and the sacrifice of the men who strapped themselves into those rockets not knowing if they'd ever come home. And that's why he fights back. Not with anger, but with evidence. Duke methodically explains the details that only someone who's lived them could know. He talks about the 1/6 gravity that made even the smallest steps feel like controlled leaps. He describes the heat of the sun on his suit, the bone-deep silence when he cut the comms, and the weight of lunar dust clinging to every seam. He points to the 800 pounds of rocks still sitting in labs around the world. Rocks that no backyard conspiracy could manufacture. His credibility comes from his dual perspective. He wasn't just the voice in Houston giving Armstrong go for landing. He was also the man out there bouncing across the Descartes highlands with John Young. That combination, Capcom and Moonwalker, makes him untouchable in these debates. He's literally the last living astronaut who can say he was both the guide and the explorer. No one else can offer that vantage point, and he's using it. In the past year, Duke has leaned into public speaking, educational interviews, and even podcasts, making sure younger generations hear the truth straight from the source. He knows time isn't on his side. He's spoken about wanting his grandchildren's generation to know Apollo wasn't mythology. It was men, rockets, and risk. He says he feels personally responsible for defending the truth before his voice goes silent. You can hear that urgency in his tone now. It's less about nostalgia and more about warning. He's admitted the deniers will never fully disappear, but if his testimony can outlive him, if one more classroom, one more late-night viewer walks away knowing Apollo was real, then he's done his duty. Duke knows the clock is ticking. Out of the 12 men who walked on the moon, only 4 are still alive, and he's one of them. That reality weighs heavily on him. He's spoken about it in interviews, admitting that every year he feels the responsibility grow sharper. When his generation is gone, the Apollo story will shift from living memory into history books, and he wants to make sure it isn't twisted, doubted, or forgotten. That's why in recent years Duke has stepped out of the quiet shadows. He's made more public appearances, taken interviews, visited schools, and sat for long-form conversations with museums. When asked why, he's clear. He feels it's his duty to pass on what he saw, because there are details of Apollo that no textbook can capture. The silence, the strange stillness of the lunar surface, and the way Earth hung in the sky like a fragile blue ornament. He knows those memories will vanish unless he shares them. At the South Carolina State Museum, Duke told students that standing on the moon wasn't just about planting a flag. It was about expanding human possibility. He wants young people to see themselves as the next explorers, to believe the same way he once believed, back when Apollo was still just a dream. That's also why he's so excited about Artemis. He said it feels like a continuation of Apollo's promise, a chance for new astronauts to not only return to the moon, but to go further, to use it as a springboard. In his words, the moon was never the finish line. It was always a proving ground. He believes what they learned on those dusty plains will guide humanity's path to Mars. But Duke also admits something more personal. At nearly 90, he talks openly about mortality. He knows his time is limited. He wants his grandchildren and their generation to inherit a clear story of Apollo. Not as myth, not as conspiracy bait, but as the foundation for what comes next. He hopes that when they watch Artemis lift off, they'll see the line connecting back to his own footprints. Duke insists the moon is just the beginning. Mars is next. Apollo wasn't the final chapter, it was the prologue. And the real question as he sees it is whether we have the courage to take the next giant leap. For Duke, speaking out now isn't about glory. It's about making sure the truth survives him. That when the last moonwalker is gone, their story remains intact. Not softened by Hollywood, not twisted by conspiracy theories. Just the raw, difficult, beautiful truth of what they saw and what they did. The moon wasn't what we've been told. It was harder, stranger, and more hostile than any image could convey. But they went anyway. They worked through the fear, the isolation, and the limits of their equipment. And they brought back knowledge that still shapes our understanding of the solar system. Duke wants that legacy preserved. Not for himself, but for the next generation who'll stand on lunar soil and push even further into the unknown. Because if we forget what Apollo really was, if we let the myths replace the truth, then we've lost more than history. We've lost the foundation for everything that comes next.
Thank you for coming, giving me the opportunity to share my faith with you. God is good all the time. Thank you very much.